Interesting developments over the past 24 hours as it relates to something that Chris Sims casually mentioned during an episode of PFTOT last week when we were discussing players that are untouchable from a trade standpoint. And that all came up because the Bengals insist there was no way, no how. They were giving up the number 1 overall pick. They wanted Joe Burrow, which is ludicrous because he's not yet untouchable. We agreed that Patrick Mahomes is, Lamar Jackson is, Aaron Donald likely is, Aaron Rodgers because of his contract this year is. And we talked about Russell Wilson. And Chris Sims mentioned that prior to the 2018 draft, there was a conversation between the Seahawks and the Browns about a possible trade of Wilson to Cleveland for the number 1 overall pick in the draft. And I didn't think anything of it at the time, but as the past 7 days unfolded, reporters were hearing what he had to say, people were picking it up, and more importantly, and here's how it hit my radar screen yesterday, Big Cat, people who are in the know as to what did or didn't happen were starting to be contacted by reporters who were chasing the story. So I started to hear from these people saying, what the hell did you guys say? So it's like, I don't know. I found the clip. I passed it around, and we then, and this is something that fell into our lap. I want people to understand, we're not out there trying to shake the trees for some sort of a hot take that we can use to fuel a slow news cycle. And maybe we should have, but this is something that just fell out of the sky, and I'm not going to ignore it when it falls out of the sky. And Big Cat, the information I got yesterday tells me there was a conversation. There was a conceptual discussion between the Seahawks and the Browns regarding a Russell Wilson trade. And it comes down to this. The debate, and we've talked about this before, the debate that a team will necessarily have when it comes to paying a huge amount of money to a quarterback. At what point do you say, I'd rather have young, cheap players, even if it's the first overall pick in the draft, it's going to cost me a hell of a lot less. The 4-year contract is going to cost me less than 1 year average with the deal that this player wants. That's why a team would consider it. And when you look at the Seahawks' greatest success of the last decade, when did it happen? When Russell Wilson was working under his rookie contract.
Can I say, Mike, that I actually, if I were Russell Wilson, I would be happy that this actually happened. And that's simply because that means that the organization I play for is always thinking in a smart way. And I think they made the right decision because Russell Wilson is a top 5, top 3 quarterback in the NFL, and it's hard to find a guy like that. They don't grow on trees. But if you are a fan of the Seahawks and you see this news, you should be happy, not mad, because at the end of the day, when you're rooting for your team, you want your front office, you want your organization to always try to think ahead and how they can figure out a way to stay competitive year in and year out. Did they get close to doing this? Probably not. But the fact that they picked up a phone and did their due diligence and looked around and just weighed all their options is exactly what I would want them to do if I were a fan of the Seahawks. And if you're Russell Wilson, it's exactly what I'd want the tone to be in the organization, that they will always look to everywhere, to every single place, to every single avenue when it comes to trade, free agency, draft, whatever it may be, to make the team better. So this is a tricky situation where people could probably take it the wrong way, but I see this as nothing more than the Seahawks doing a great job of at least seeing, because what happens, Mike? What happens if you call up and someone offers you, I didn't even know what the max is, but they offer you 3-4 picks, first-round picks for Russell Wilson? I'm not saying that you should do it because Russell Wilson is that good and you probably should keep him on your team, but it's worth exploring that option and it's worth at least hearing someone say it.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, and it is smart to always be thinking about what you can do with the current assets you have and how you can maximize those assets in the future. And when you have that much money devoted to one player, it's at least worth considering what else you could do, especially when at the time the Seahawks knew they were a year away from giving Russell Wilson what still is the richest contract in league history. And before he signed that contract and he imposed a deadline on them, and usually these artificial deadlines don't work, Russell set the deadline and the team complied with it, which the team probably resents at some level because these teams like to be the ones who dictate to the players, not the other way around. Wilson was on Jimmy Fallon, and I remember last year, Sims and I were laughing about it when Fallon asks Wilson about the possibility of being the highest paid player in the NFL. That doesn't seem like something that falls naturally into Jimmy Fallon's range of expertise or things he would give a crap about, right? And so Wilson knew what he was doing, and the fact that there's a no trade clause in his contract we should not view that as some sort of an accidental blip. Wilson and his agent wanted to be sure that they couldn't do this to him without him being involved in the process. And, the idea that he could be traded in the future, and there are people who believe it could still happen, and Seahawks fans will say, he's got a no-trade clause, it can't happen. It's like, folks, just because he has a no-trade clause doesn't mean he can't be traded. He can veto any trade. If it's a trade he likes, he can say, I'll waive my no-trade clause if you're trading me to this team, or this team. And teams that I think it makes sense to watch, the Raiders, because of John Gruden's perpetual love for quarterbacks, and also he could talk to this one without standing on a step stool. The Cowboys, who are going to have to pay somebody a ton of money. If I got to pay Dak Prescott a ton of money, I'd rather pay that money to a more proven commodity than Russell Wilson. We love you, Dak, but it's the truth. And then maybe the Saints post Drew Brees. The problem, though, is the Saints are going to have to move on next year, most likely without Brees. You can't trade Russell Wilson in 2021. The cap hit would be too big for the Seahawks. This is something that would happen, if at all, in 2022 or 2023 as he gets closer to that next big contract. And the reason that Wilson is able to drive such a hard bargain, he does short-term deals, 4-year extensions. His agent, Mark Rodgers, is not a football agent. So he doesn't have all these tentacles and relationships he needs to worry about, where if you push too hard with this client, they're going to get you with that client. And you have to be sensitive to having that right tone, having that right atmosphere with all the people you negotiate with. From Rodgers' perspective, I got one guy I negotiate on behalf of, and I'm going to get him the best possible deal. And if you don't like it, tough crap. And that's one of the reasons, I think, why the Seahawks would at least entertain the possibility of getting a quarterback who's represented by someone that they can maybe exert a little more leverage over, because that guy represents 5 other players on their team.
All right. Well, that was a no sarcasm, great wrinkle from you, Mike Florio. I actually really enjoy when you drop those knowledge bombs, because I didn't realize that dynamic was at play. The other reason that Russell Wilson can dictate the terms is he's really, 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 really good at football. And like I said at the start, those guys don't grow on trees. And every single franchise in the NFL is constantly looking for their Russell Wilson. And if you actually did a list of all the quarterbacks, which I'm sure we will do in a couple weeks because there's still no sports, we would probably put Russell Wilson in that 2, 3, 4 slot. And you would say to yourself, how many teams would trade mortgage the future for a guy like Russell Wilson today? And guess what? The list is, 25 deep, whatever it may be. There are a lot of teams that would be lining at the door for a guy like Russell Wilson to be their quarterback. So he's in the ultimate, position of power, because not only does he have the agent dynamic you just talked about, the short-term deals, but guess what? All of his play and all of his talent backs up all of it.
No, you're absolutely right. And, here's the thing. He's going to be able to try to push the bar even higher than it already is. He's going to have a chance to push it past Patrick Mahomes. And if anyone does trade for him at some point, they're going to have to balance what they give the Seahawks for Russell Wilson plus what they're willing to pay him, because they're most likely going to give him a new contract on the way through the door. But back to the original point. This is a very real dynamic where teams engage in that cost-benefit analysis of clinging to a quarterback who is taking up a huge chunk of the salary cap versus rolling the dice on a young guy who they can have for 4 years, maybe 5 with the 5th-year option at an affordable rate. And when you look at how much better college quarterbacks are coming into the NFL than they used to be, it's just a matter of time before somebody does it, before somebody says, we're just not doing it. And it's not just going to be the Bears and Mitch Trubisky when it's obvious they shouldn't pick up the 5th-year option and give him a long-term contract. It's going to be somebody that we look at and say, hey, that guy's pretty good. Why are they not keeping him? And you know what? Big cat in hindsight, it's probably what the Rams should have done with your guy, Jared Goff.
You don't have to say that. You went a little too far there. You didn't have to say that. You really did.
I did have to say it. I didn't have to, but I wanted to.
Well,
here's what I want to say next.
We're gonna have these guys coming up, right? Like these guys, the Baker Mayfield, Josh Rosen, obviously not, but Josh Allen, Sam Darnold, Lamar Jackson draft is going to be coming up in the next year. So that will be a very interesting dynamic, because you could make a case one way or the other with probably all those guys when it comes to picking up their 5th-year option.
and the best move for any of these teams to make. The moment the third regular season ends, for these guys that they choose to keep, get them signed to a long-term contract then and there. The longer you wait, the more expensive it gets. Just look at what the Cowboys are going through with Dak Prescott.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.